Hello. So in this video, I want to give you a lesson plan for teaching students some of the basics of writing effective business messages. So this is the way that I approached this with my classes. And this is a lesson for very early in the semester where you're just getting them familiarized with what goes into writing professionally. So the first component of the lesson that I do is I go over a number of principles for business writing. I actually start with the 5 key principles of business writing, which I've talked about in a different video. But that's adopting a you-centered attitude or a reader-oriented attitude, being brief, being polite, being positive, and being clear and specific. And actually, because I teach those 5 key principles in an earlier lesson, I have the students remind themselves or remind us as a class of what those key principles are. But then I talk about some additional principles, starting with most business writing, it should be conversational in tone. So this is a fairly relaxed tone. This is clear. This is easy to follow. You're not using high excessive verbiage and things like this. I think the easiest way to think about this, to think about what conversational writing means, is would you say this to a person in a professional setting? If you were interacting with someone face to face, how would you put it? That's kind of the guide for conversational writing. I next talk about using short paragraphs, 125 words or less. We talk about why that's important, both in terms of keeping everything focused, and actually one of the reasons for doing this is that each paragraph should have one key idea that it presents, but also because when you're dealing with short paragraphs like this, readers are less likely to say, I've got the gist of this, I'm going to stop reading this paragraph now. And when you're thinking about very busy business readers or professional readers, you want to make sure that you are considerate of their time. We also talk about the claim evidence interpretation structure, which I've talked about in other videos as well, but that sort of basic approach to paragraphing. We talk about some of the techniques that you can use to very quickly and efficiently present information, especially bulleted lists or numbered lists. So these are ways of giving very concise and accessible sets of information. The only real difference I think between them is that a bulleted list doesn't necessarily imply that the order of information is important, whereas a numbered list tends to. But these are both ways that let readers quickly and easily skim information while still getting the knowledge you want them to get. I also tell them about infographics as a quick and easy way of conveying a lot of information. So while that may be just pictures, it's more often in business writing going to be charts, graphs, or tables. And again, those are visual images that very quickly and efficiently give you information. I talk about how in longer messages, you want to break them up with section headings. And again, that's a way of helping readers move through information efficiently, as well as helping them orient themselves within a document. I do talk about sentence variety, but I do it on a very basic level. I've done a video in more detail about sentence variety, but basically I say you want to use different lengths of sentences, and you want to organize information within sentences differently, because this is going to help engage readers as they go. I remind them that you want to make sure your writing is audience oriented, especially answering the so what question, where you establish the stakes for your reader. And then lastly, I emphasize edit, edit, edit. Because even though grammar and mechanics is not in itself that important compared to the quality of your ideas and the way that your argument is expressed, in the real world, we judge people based on grammar and mechanics. It's not necessarily fair, but it is how it goes. So, I try and move very quickly through those things, those initial things, so that we can spend the majority of the class time on activities. And the way that I do this is set up for a 75-minute class. If you have a 50-minute class, you will not be able to do all three of these. There's just not enough time. But I have 3 business messages, sample business messages that we look at. You can create your own. I'm probably not going to put images of them up on the screen because it's kind of awkward, I think, to do so. And the content of them in terms of this lesson plan in this video is not super, super important. But if you really want to borrow the particular documents that I use, you can send me an email and I'm happy to share them with you. But basically, I have 3 messages, 4 documents. So the first one is what's called the Carefree Catering Memo. Basically, it's a message from a caterer to the I forget what exactly his role is, but he's like head of entertainment or something in a fraternity. And the initial message is very unclear. It's disorganized, it's not super professional, etc., etc. So I put that up on the projector. I have a student read that message aloud for us, and then we talk about all of the problems with it. So the bad structure, the lack of clarity about what different elements are going to cost, what elements of this catering service are going to cost, etc., etc. We talk about as many of the major problems with this message as the students identify. I basically ask them what doesn't work here. Then, in the interests of being fair to that message, I will ask them what does work here. And usually they identify a couple of things that the message does well. So that's very, very good. They're thinking in a positive direction as well as identifying the flaws, which is very, I think, useful. Then I put up a revised version. So we got the Carefree Catering before message and the Carefree Catering after message. The revised version is much stronger. It's more professional in tone. It has an itemized list of costs. The paragraphs are more focused, more concise, etc., etc. And so the main thing that we do with this is go through and I have students identify what works better here. What has this version of the message done that's more professional, clearer, more specific, etc., than the original version? And then we talk about what, if anything, the revised version could do better. And there are a couple of flaws in my revised version that I use. So there are things, again, because this is, I think, really, really useful for an activity like this, is to think not just in terms of what works, but what could be done better. And when we're looking at a negative example like the before memo, not just thinking about what doesn't work, but also what does work. We always want to be, I think, looking for positive and negative models in anything that we read. So then we switch to the second message, which is a book rejection letter. Basically, it's from the editor of a press to an author, and it's very awkwardly stilted in its language. It comes across as a little bit rude in many places. It's kind of condescending, and it's not exactly super clear. So we talk about those issues. And again, I have someone read that message aloud for us, and then I ask the students what doesn't work here, and they identify the problems. Then, and one of the things that I often tell them with this message is, I think a good litmus test for conversational writing is, if you just hear this aloud and you don't have the text in front of you, can you follow along with what it means? And with this message, it's fairly difficult to do so. So then I have them work in small groups with a partner, by themselves, small group, whatever they prefer. I don't really care. To revise this message, to make it clearer, to make it more polite, more professional. And after I've given them 12 to 15 minutes or so, I ask two groups to read their revisions. And then just very, very basically talk about them. Often basically just in the sense of, these versions are much clearer, they're much more polite, and basically these are a substantial improvement over the original version. Then I have them do a discussion forum post. So I'm teaching at a university, Penn State, where we're using Canvas. But if you've got any sort of course learning or course management system or anything like that that lets you have students do discussions or something like this, you can do that through that particular course management system. Basically, I give them one more message. This one, the one that I use, is from an employer who is mad that employees have been putting fake times on their time cards, and so is instituting all of these sort of draconian policies. It's an extremely irate memo, extremely unprofessional, etc., etc. And so I ask students on their own to revise this memo to make it more polite, more professional, etc., etc., and then to post their responses. Now, in my classes for business writing, I don't actually care when students get to the discussion forum posts. Like, if they want to come back to them after class and spend more time working on them to really improve them, I'm totally fine with that. Personally, I think that's a really good policy to take. But if you want to ensure that they can do the discussion forum post during class time, you do want to make sure that you end the sort of active part of the lesson a little bit earlier. So I tend to give my students the last maybe 13 to 15 minutes to do this. Again, reminding them that if they want to come back to this after class and post later on, they have the opportunity to do that. So that works out really well for a 75-minute class. If you want to get those discussion forum posts completely done during class, you would need to condense the earlier portion of the lesson a little bit. But I think this is a really good way of introducing some of the fundamental components of professional writing, largely because it asks students to assess professional writing or sample professional writing, to identify what works and what doesn't work about it, and to figure out ways of improving it and then practice improving it. So it exercises a lot of great skills.